Hi there, folks. Ben Beadle, Chief Executive of the NRLA here. I bumped into Neil of PayProp here at the Conversative Party Conference. I've certainly been to a number of sessions and been able to challenge the anti-landlord rhetoric that we are hearing. But Neil, you were at an event that I wasn't at this morning, and what did you hear?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people being told or contrived messages that are from a tenant point of view. That everything is landlord-led, that landlords are out to make a profit, that the only way to fix this is by demonising landlords and moving around to building more housing. And that's just not the truth. The truth of the matter is, nobody is against fair reform. But fair reform is not in favour of a tenant or a landlord. It almost removes the politics from it. We're dealing with housing, we're dealing with the property. Let's centre on that and make it work for everybody. And that needs policy change now. And I know I'm probably not popular, but I still don't understand why the mechanism for things like ROPA has already been discussed, it's already been highlighted. It is already something that industry is quite welcoming to say, look, give us a playing field that we know. Stop chipping away at us, death by 1,000 cuts.
No, right. And do you think this is because the government actually doesn't have a proper strategy for the private rented sector or for the wider housing market that we are part of?
Yeah, and I would go even further. I would say no party actually has put together a clear proposal of how to handle the private rented sector. And I know the conservative values are all around home ownership, and I have no problem with that. But there's also the reality that not everybody can own a home, and they've got to wake up to that and decide to take it. And I was just at something actually as well, the one before, where they were talking about a recent study on how many voters the private rented sector and their renting situation will be a deciding factor when it comes to the next general election as to who they choose. And at the moment, over 2/3 of them have not decided which party they're going to vote for because they don't feel that it's actually been answered.
And I think you have the same question for the landlord audience as well, because I am a paid-up member, as you might expect. But I listen to some of the things going on here, and I think, Christ, you don't represent me. You don't represent my views on what we're doing. Where does the landlord go to vote? Who do they vote for? And I was at the Labour conference last week, and I can tell you it probably isn't for them, because the proposals that Lisa Nandy has set out are far worse than the fairer renting white paper. But the point I made in the session today was this sort of conservative mantra about home ownership, which obviously is a classic Tory policy. Good idea. Why wouldn't you don't want to rent forever? People want to buy. Of course they do. But the problem is, Rome is burning right now. Yeah, literally right now. And we don't have enough social homes, and we don't have enough homes in the private rented sector. In fact, both of those sectors are in decline. How on earth, question for you, how on earth do we turn those renters into buyers when the backdrop is increasing rents?
Well, unfortunately, we've got a huge problem, and you're right. Supply, I can see why they go back to that, because we do have a supply and demand situation that drives prices. The government, in the same way it's had to do with its dealing with energy, I see there is no way other than it steps in. I think they need to make the social housing element of payment more attractive to the private rented sector. The cap, the LHA, it has so far differed from where it is now. It doesn't allow people on social to even access the private rented sector. And it needs to make the landlords, I was just talking about it, in a lot of areas they don't get in for huge investments. There are other ways to pay their money where they could get a far better return. They are doing it because there is a social need. And part of that social need is make them feel like they're welcomed into the sector. You give them the right regulation, you give them the right hoops to jump through, and a landlord is not going to say no. But if they cannot understand or feel, or they feel they're being pushed out from the vital need they're filling, that's when you're going to get pushback. And it's get away from it being so political.
I agree.
Housing is infrastructure, and it needs to remain as such.
And last point here, I think, profit isn't actually a dirty word as long as it's a sustainable profit. The private rented sector needs to encourage that sort of investment into it. It needs to encourage people to stay. But we know that if mortgage rates change significantly in the next 12 months, that 20% of landlords will be remortgaging. We know if base rates go up to 5%, that 50% of houses in the private rented sector will be unaffordable, and that's going to pose some real challenges. But I was also at a social housing event where people were saying, or local authorities or housing associations rather, were saying that if rents rise and there is a cap, they won't be able to make the investment that people need in housing. And it's like, wow.
If you could show me one place in the world where rent caps and controls has worked, I would get behind it. But unfortunately, there are too many reasons for why it's not worked. Profit, you're right, isn't a dirty word, and at the Conversative Conference, you would certainly expect it not to be a dirty word. I think what we need to get back to is understanding where we want government assistance and help and support. And that the prices increase, wages haven't increased as much. That's not a reflection of property.
No.
Don't demonise what has actually followed up, where government has failed to keep up in line. You can't bring the other one down and demonise it for where it's gone. What you've actually got to do is say, how do we lift everybody? Rising tide raises all ships. How do we do that? Let's not just grab the ship we don't like and drag it down, because everybody drowns. And that seems to be the messaging that we've got at the moment, that instead of it being this levelling up, the private rented sector is seen to be a need to level down, and I think that's incorrect.
Yeah, and I would say it's the pathway to not be elected, I would suggest.
Absolutely.
These guys do need to look at this, and they need to look at it quick. A few reflections from the Tory Party Conference. We'll have a wander around, see who else we can find, and do a little video. See you soon.